Money in Excel. Options for creating an income statement from the data that has been gathered from the financial institutions. Get ready because it's time to excel in money using Money in Excel. Here we are in our Money in Excel worksheet. In prior presentations, we set up the template for Money in Excel, then connected to the financial institution to get our financial data. We got to the template, and you can find the template if you go to the File tab in an Excel worksheet. We then go down to New, and you're looking for this item, which is Money in Excel, which may be up in the New area or down below down here. You're going to need some kind of Office 365 subscription model, typically, in order to have access to it. Going back to our data, we then connected to the financial institutions. Then we got our data here, and we're focusing in not so much at the balance sheet side of things, although Money in Excel does have that functionality as well. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail in the future, how we can think about our totals and whatnot. But now we're looking at the income statement, imagining at this point that we want to convert this data to an income statement, possibly one that if we had a Schedule C business, that we can then use to help us with our tax preparation, kind of comparing and contrasting the process of how we might do this from the same type of bank data as if we use some other kind of more standardized accounting software, such as a QuickBooks, just to look at the pros and cons of taking that data and converting it to something we can use for the taxes. So we then imported this data. Note that you can sort for the entire year. It did give us enough information, goes back far enough, that we can do all of basically last year or possibly even the year before that. And then we had to go in there and categorize our accounts. So we categorized our accounts by going to the tab to the right and adding the categories that were necessary. We then went back over to the tab to the left and we populated the category tabs or recalculated them so that they line up to what we want them to be. We also added subcategories, which may not be necessary. It just depends how much detail you want to get into. If you want to do a basic kind of financial statement to kind of do a really basic Schedule C, you might not need this other information here for the subcategories. So now we want to take this information and think about, well, how can I basically make this or clean this up a little bit more so that I can make an income statement with it? So we talked about one way you can do that is we could sort by the category up top. We're sorting by the category. And because we named everything that's going to be not part of the business with a number, then basically using kind of like an account number, it sorts it up top. And then we have the income accounts, which starts our income statement, and then everything else is expense accounts down below. And that's basically our income statement. However, it's not grouped as ideally as we would like. We'd like all the income type accounts to be grouped together in one number, and then all the utilities and the rent to be grouped together. So there's various ways you can imagine to take this data and just basically regroup it so we can group everything together. Bottom line is we have the account we want to kind of weed out to our main business account up top, and then everything below we're going to take that data. So there's some more there's sophisticated ways to do this and less sophisticated ways to do this. So we could do this all in this sheet. For example, we could select this whole data range and then insert a pivot table and work from there. But I think it might be safer to take this data out of this Excel worksheet, use this as basically our data Excel worksheet, and at least copy it over to either another tab or possibly over to another Excel worksheet. So I would feel safer basically making another tab over here at least, or possibly opening up another Excel worksheet so I don't mess up, this whole Excel data sheet, right? So I'm going to go back on over and I'm just going to then copy all this data. So I'm going to go up top and I'm just going to put my cursor on line 6 and I'm going to go all the way down to all the data that we have used here. And so there's the end of the table. And then I'm just going to right click that. I'm copying the whole rows, copy that information. Then I'm going to go over to the sheet. On the right hand side, I'm going to make sure I'm in A1 or make sure at least I'm in column A because I need to have the entire column. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to paste it using 1, 2, 3, meaning the values only. I don't want any formulas here. I just want to have the values. So there we have it. We can close then. This item on the right is not really applicable for us, so we got a little bit more space that we can work. So there we have our information. Now I can basically filter this information multiple different ways. Again, one, we can just basically cut this thing down to a data that we can use for like just a basic income statement, or we can use a pivot table. or we can try to use some kind of more other types of tables to try to manipulate this data. So we'll go through these different methods here, but just let's sort this data a little bit nicer now. So I'm gonna highlight. Let's go through and just widen some of these cells so we can see the whole title up top. So I'm gonna widen some of these cells here, and so I can see a little bit more of the data. One way we could do this is highlight the whole thing like this, and then double click in the middle, and that widens it. It widens it probably too far because I don't need all this kind of data over here, but that'll work. And then I want to make the top bold so that whatever I do to it, Excel knows that the top is like the header. So I'm going to select the entire row. I'm going to go to the Home tab up top and make it bold. I'm going to embolden the top row. So if I make a table or a pivot table, once again, Excel knows that that's kind of like the header row up top. And then note this row is a date row, and it's not showing in the format of a date. So I'd like to have dates there. So one way you can do that is I'm going to select the entire B column. I want to make it formatted as a date. So since I pasted it 1, 2, 3, it didn't have the date formatting. So I got to go to the Home tab, Number, and I can go to this General drop down, and I'd like to see it as a short date type form. So there we have the dates, and then the merchant account looks good. The category account looks good. The subcategory, I believe that's good. The amount is okay. Although I kind of like to see the negative amounts in brackets. So I might select this whole thing right here, right click on this item, and then edit. I might say, let's edit this thing. I'm gonna format the cells. And then I'm gonna go to currency, and I'm gonna go to brackets and maybe negative numbers even for the negative numbers and brackets instead of a negative sign. And so that looks good. I'm gonna get rid of the dollar sign. That's what I usually like for currencies, or I mean for numbers. A currency with no dollar sign and red brackets. And so we'll close that. So there we have that. And then we have the account. Now this is probably not as useful to me. You might want this because I might have multiple accounts. For me, I have like a Visa card account where some of this data came from, and the other came from the checking account. And if they both had stuff that had business stuff in it, then I might want the data, from both those items. But I may not need to know at this point which institution they came from, because I use that to figure out in the category. So over here, I might just delete the account. So I'm going to take this whole column. I'm going to delete that. I'm going to delete the account number. I don't need to know the institution. I don't need to know the transaction ID or the account ID or the instruction ID. All those things I don't need to know. So I'm just going to right click on them and delete it. So that'll simplify my table a lot. Then the category type, we have personal and balance sheet. That could be useful. Date, month, year. And so this is broken out in basically different categories rather than just the date field on the left. I don't think I'll need that. Beginning of the week, month, I don't think I need that. So I'm going to put my cursor on H all the way to L, right click on this and delete that information. So now we've got our data. I also don't need column 1 over here. This whole column doesn't have anything in it. So I can put my cursor on column 1 on A, right click on that and delete that information. So now you can see the easiest way we can kind of group this is to basically just go down to the income numbers and sum up, the income items versus the other the rest of the items here. We can use a more sophisticated pivot table. We can add a table and do other kind of another kind of table type of format. So we'll think more about that next time. I'm going to copy this sheet over. This is kind of like the raw data that now I feel comfortable manipulating, considering it's in a different tab. And if I mess it up, I can always go back to the transactions tab and start it over again. So next time we'll do this in kind of more of a kind of a clunky way, I guess, actually put, just adding up the income line items and whatnot and coming up with an income statement that way. But I think that's more of a way that more people understand. We'll just use the trusty sum function, and sum this thing up. And then we'll think about possibly later using a pivot table. And if we use the pivot table, we can do a little bit more options on breaking this data out a little bit more easily, right? Because then we can possibly break out some of the personal data or get some more detail in terms of the types of income accounts using the subcategories and then the category types, which might give us some more flexibility to make different reports more easily, although pivot tables are more difficult to kind of imagine how they're gonna be put together. Also note, when we do the pivot tables and whatnot, it's nice to have all your data being populated here. So we might actually want to populate something in the blank cells down here, just so we have, data in the whole table. But we'll talk more about that as we go into future presentations. This is the first step I would think about, to just kind of clean this thing up and get it ready for something and to make an income statement.